Hello everybody, it's Nick here with Nick Tolman Music. Today we're going to continue our beginner guitar lesson series using Mel Bay's Modern Guitar Method, Grade 1. Alright, so today we are going to be looking at page 43. And page 43 is titled A Chord Review. And now, what it is basically doing is it's doing a few things. It's introducing the A7 chord, but it's also kind of reviewing some chords that we've learned and kind of like reminding you how they fit into certain keys, okay? Now, disclaimer right out of the gate. This is one page and one little description thing that over the years, I've kind of struggled with the way that Mel Bay has presented this one. So I'm going to kind of give you some clarification on this. And I kind of get where they're coming from, kind of delivering information in a simple way, but it's also not completely accurate. So let's talk about it. So if you look at the top of page 43, it says A Chord Review. Now it says the key of C has 6 chords. Right out of the gate, that's wrong. Every key signature in its natural state has 7 chords, okay? There's 7, but they say 6 because it hasn't talked about diminished chords at all yet, and it's not going to introduce diminished chords for some time now, and that's okay. Just know that there are actually 7 in every key. There are 7 chords that happen naturally. Now there are other chords that will happen regularly, and this kind of introduces that concept, which I like, but just keep that in mind. So, and then it goes on, it says they are C, F, G7, A minor, D minor, and E7. Okay, that is also not entirely, it's not really correct, okay? So let's talk about this a little bit. I want to kind of deliver the information to you as accurately as I can and help you kind of understand. So first off, C, F, G7, A minor, D minor, and E7. To clarify, E7 is not in the key of C. It just isn't. And I don't know why they include E7 as being in the key of C. It's not in any kind of way. Now, E7 will regularly be used in the key of C, acting as like an alternate chord, which we can talk about here in a minute, but it's not. So the way I like to think about chords is in association with the scale, okay? So if we look at the C major scale, I'm going to put it up here for you. So we've got C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then C, which is a repeat, right? So really there are 7 notes in the scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then that 8th note is just a repeat of the first note, right? Just an octave higher. There are 7 notes. And for each of those notes, there is a chord associated with it, okay? Now, they have specific names and things like that. We're not going to dive into that too much. But one of the things, the ways I like to think of chords in association to a key is with a number, right? So we have a 1 chord, which would be based off of C. We have a 2 chord, which would be based off of the 2nd note of the scale, which is D. The 2 chord is always minor. Okay, so they included that D minor as part of the C chord. And then we have the 3 chord, which is based off of the 3rd note of the scale, so in the key of C would be E. But the 3 chord is always minor, okay, and this is where it kind of hangs me up a little bit here on this page. It's not an E7 chord, it's an E minor chord. So in the key of C, naturally, just C of key right out of the gate, that 3 chord is just always going to be minor. E minor. And then we have the 4 chord, right, which would be based off the 4th note of the scale, or F. 4 chord is always major. The 5 chord, which would be, it calls it G7 here, which it can be. It can be G or G7. Both fit in the key. That is the 5 chord. We call this a dominant chord, and we'll talk about that term here in a minute. So we have G, which is the 5 chord based off the 5th note of the scale. And that can either be just standard G, or it can be G7 chord. And then we have the 6th note of the scale, which is A, and the sixth chord will always be minor, A minor. And then we have the 7th note of the scale, which is B, and the 7 chord is always diminished. And we'll talk more about that later. You don't need to worry about diminished chords now, but it is a thing, okay? So that's what it is, regardless of what major key you are in, okay? So whether it is C or G or B flat or A or whatever, any major key, the 1 chord is always going to be major. The 2 chord and 3 chord, 2nd and 3rd chords, will always be minor. Then the 4 and 5 chords will always be major. The 5 chord can also be a 7 chord, right? And then the 6 chord will always be minor, and the 7 chord will always be diminished, okay? That's the same in any key. So let's talk a little bit about that term dominant, because this is going to explain why you can have other chords that kind of come into a key, all right? Now, a dominant chord is a chord that naturally pulls back to the 1 chord, okay? So the 1 chord in the key of C is C. In music theory, we call this the tonic. It's like the home base. It's like whenever you're playing a song, it's always kind of wanting to come back to this location, right? So like you hear a progression like this. You just want to hear, that resolution. The reason that happens is because of a dominant chord. Now the dominant chord, there are basically 2 dominant chords in any key. It's either the 5 chord or the 7 chord. But for us right now, it's always going to be the 5 chord because we're not talking about diminished chord right now. But that 5 chord is always going to act in that dominant role, okay? It's going to be the one that's kind of bringing you back to that home base or that 1 chord. Now the reason that you can use like for the 5 chord in the key of C, you can use a G or a G7. Whenever you make that dominant chord, that 7 chord, it makes it even more powerful. It makes it even more want to lead back to that 1. So that's why sometimes they'll call it a dominant 7 chord. Has that really strong pull back to 1. Now what happens sometimes is in a song, what they'll do is they will use what's called a borrowed dominant or an alternate dominant, right? Now what this is they might use a dominant chord from another key to lead into one of the chords that are in the key of C. So an example might be, and this is where E7 comes into play, okay? So E7, as it says here, it says it's in the key of C, which is really not, but E7 can be used to pull to A minor, right? That would be the dominant chord that would pull really strongly to A minor or to A major for that matter. But if I did something like this, right? So I went from C to E7, which is out of the key. That is pulling naturally to this A minor chord, okay? That can happen. But there are other chords that it could happen to as well, right? So maybe you want a really strong pull into, I don't know, your 4 chord, okay? So you might do something like this. Oh, C7 chord, that's not in the key of C, but it pulls to your 4 chord, which is F, okay? Or maybe you want a chord that's going to pull really strongly into your D minor chord. So the dominant chord for D minor would be A7. So you might have something like this. right? With that C to A7, which is definitely outside of the key, that pulls to D minor, G, G7, C. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm borrowing some chords that don't belong to the key and using those chords really just to make the music more interesting. Okay, that's what that is. So you read on, the latter three are in the relative minor key, but use the key signature of C. Okay, so it's kind of giving you a roundabout explanation of chords in the key of C. What I've given you is really like the full package. Like, that's what it is. There are 7 chords in any key, and it's just a matter of knowing which ones they are. Okay, so he calls them outside chords. We talked about that, or accidental chords. That's what I was talking about with like a borrowed dominant or an alternate dominant chord. The most commonly used are these chords, D7, A7, in the key of C, which I showed you, A7. So D7 would be a dominant into G, so you might have something like this. Right? But yes, that D7 can be used as an accidental chord or an outside chord. The 6 chords found in the key of G, and then it kind of goes through the key of G. But again, it's the same concept like we talked about before. You have a 1 chord, 2 chord, 3 chord, 4 chord, 5 chord, 6 chord, 7 chord, and they all have a specific type of chord that is associated with them. And that would apply to G as well. So then it kind of walks through the chords. All right, so let's take a look at this A7 chord. So it gives you an A7 chord, and this is also a little funny to me. Yes, this is an A7 chord, what it gives you here. So it tells you to play your A chord, which is, you're going to have your open A. You're not going to have an open E like it says. That should be an X, okay? You've got your open A. Then you've got E here with your second finger on the 4th string. Then you've got A here with your first finger on the 3rd string, 2nd fret. And then you've got C sharp here with your 3rd finger on the 2nd string. And then it's got G up here on top. All right, now that is a way to play A7. To me, that's not really the standard fingering. It just kind of depends on what you are wanting to do. So basically an A7 chord is just an A chord that includes the note G, okay? That can happen in 2 ways. Like it shows here, if you want that high G sound, which it utilizes in the exercises that are down there, that can be there. The other way, which I think is the more standard kind of A7 fingering, is to do it this way and use your open G. So instead of playing your A here with your first finger, you're just gonna have an open G. So you'd have your 2nd finger on E. You've got open A, 2nd finger on E, open G, and then 3rd finger on C sharp. That's also an A7 chord. You just have your G in a different spot. So there's a couple options for you. All right, let's take a look at these couple little studies that it gives in this top part of the page. They're just some chord studies, and they're kind of showing you how these accidental chords or these borrowed chords happen both in the key of C and the key of G. All right, so I'm going to set my metronome to 72. I'm just going to play through these for you. Here we go. 1, 2, and ready, and play. Nice, and that's just a little progression kind of showing you how each of those dominant chords leads to another, and leads to another, and leads to another, and finally to your home base, which is C. Okay, now let's try it in the key of G. Again, 72 on the metronome. 1, 2, and ready, and play. I really like those first three chords, moving from G to B7 to E7, because I love finding opportunities when you can have really strong like anchor fingers. Okay, so you've got your G chord, you move to B7, your second finger just stays, right? And then you move to E7, again your second finger just stays. So your second finger's staying in the same place the whole time through those first three chords. Yeah, so those are good little exercises to practice through. Try them at 72, try them faster and faster and faster, just getting comfortable moving between those chords. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at Lament. And this is kind of the exercise for the page. It's in the key of E minor, and it's a bass note melody thing that's happening here. And okay, I'm gonna play it at 72, and then we will break it down. So here we go. 72 on the metronome, Lament. 1, 2, 3, 1, ready, and... Okay, this exercise is not overly challenging. There's not a ton to it, okay? We're gonna walk through it and kind of tell you kind of the things that you need to do. There might be a couple, if you just try to play it right out of the gate, there are a couple things that you're gonna be like, oh, what do I do with my fingers here? But it's really actually not as challenging as you might think, okay? So let's take a look at it from the beginning. First off, we have this E minor chord starting right out of the gate, right? Now, for me, what's going to happen here in the next measure is I'm going to play that low G with my fourth finger. Okay, and that's great. And now I'm going to lift my fourth and second finger so I can play the open A. And then I'm going to drop that second finger back down so I'm playing the full E chord, E minor chord. Okay, so I'll do that one more time so you can see that movement that's happening there, nice and slow. just like that. Moving on, we've got the fourth measure. Just the notes into an A minor chord. Nothing fancy, more notes. Back to E minor. More notes. All of this is pretty simple. A minor. Back to E minor. Now we move into B7, but it's alternate because it wants the F sharp down here in the bass. So really the more accurate way of writing that chord would have been to say B7 slash F sharp, or a B7 over F sharp, because you have F sharp down in the bass. But that's okay. So it's a B7 chord exactly, except for your second finger is going to be on that low F sharp instead of on the B. And you're not going to want to really strum that A because it's not asking for that note. But if you accidentally do, guess what? It's part of the chord. It's not that big a deal. So, all right, so starting in the second measure of the second line. F sharp and then B7. Right, just an eighth note run. Back to E minor. And back to this B7 over F sharp. Another eighth note run. E minor. Now we've got this eighth note run, which is just a C chord. In fact, you can set your whole C chord and then play that high G, or you can play individual notes. Either way is fine, but it is just a C chord. And then this is the fifth measure of the third line. Oh, I love that line. It's so nice. It's not really outlining, I mean, it is outlining a B7 chord, but it's not really outlining your like standard fingering, so I would just play those notes individually. And then you've got E minor. And this is back to the same thing we did at the beginning, so then your low G with your fourth finger. B7. Then the first ending. And then it repeats. And then the second ending is just. So open E, G, and then B, and then I just set my E minor chord for that last strum. That's all there is to it. That is Lament and the breakdown there. So that is our lesson for today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you haven't already checked out my website at www.nicktolmanmusic.com, please check it out, and we will see you next time. Thanks.